welcome to Biophobia. Now we are going to discuss about a new chapter which is chapter 8 in class 10. The name of the chapter is How Do Organisms Reproduce? So reproduction is actually a very important step in the process or in the life of all living organisms. Any living organism, you take it right from microorganism to higher level organism, they reproduce. So reproduction is actually a very important process. Why is it that this reproduction is not actually included under life processes? We have already discussed about life processes lesson of class 10. Why is it that this process of reproduction is not included under life processes? It is because reproduction is very much important for a living organism, but even if the living organism does not reproduce, it can survive. So, reproduction is an important step, but it is not a very important step for the life to sustain for that particular organism. So, how do you define reproduction then? It is the process by which each and every individual living organism would produce a new individual, a new organism of its own kind. Of its own kind is an important key word for this definition of reproduction. You need to know that a cat can always give rise only to a kitten. A dog can give rise only to puppies. So each and every organism can produce something of its own kind, of the same species. This is what you meant by the term reproduction. Reproduction is an important process in the life of every living organism. Only then they can produce new individuals, and otherwise we call it as offspring. Offspring of its own kind. Now we are going to discuss about the significance of reproduction. What do you mean by significance? The importance of what reproduction is all about. So number one is it inherits characteristics. How is it inheriting characteristics? It inherits or passes over the characteristic from parent to that of the offspring. Directly from parent, the characteristics would pass over to the next generation. The next generation, we call it as offspring. Okay, and also it helps in stabilizing the population. It stabilizes the population by passing over the characteristics, and also it maintains the number of members in a population. The third point is it adds up new member to the population, and also it would look into that the species would actually exist in the world. What if the reproduction is not taking place in an organism? You may not have the existence of the species. The species would become extinct, or it may completely vanish off from the world. It is because of reproduction that you have all those organisms that are existing in the world. So that the process of reproduction is really important for a living organism. The living organism can be a primitive one, say microorganism, or an advanced human. The process of reproduction is really important. Now we are going to discuss in detail about DNA copying. What is DNA copying? As I told you, in the process of reproduction, there is the transfer of characteristics that is taking place. The transfer of characteristic from the parent to that of the next generation, which we call it as offspring, is taking place. How is this characteristics transferred from parent to offspring? It is transferred via DNA. So what do they do? DNA copying is actually a very important step in the process of reproduction. They have certain genetic informations in the form of genes. What do these genes do? These are the functional units of DNA which are responsible for coding a particular protein, which in turn would be responsible for the which would in turn would be responsible for the expression of a particular characteristics. Next, talking about DNA copying. Is that DNA copying taking place very perfectly so that from the parent exactly the characteristics would pass over to the next generation? Yes, actually, but there are some time where you could have some errors in the case of DNA copying. There may be some errors in DNA copying, and those errors in the DNA copying may lead to something called variation. See, we all know we resemble our parents in one or the other perspective, but not that we are the Xerox copies of our parents. We do have some resemblance of them, but we are not the very exact copies of our parents. We are something actually different from them. So that difference, what we are talking about, is termed as variation. So now this variation is actually an important tool for evolution. Only when there occurs or there some variation that is happening from parental generation to that of the next generation, in that way, in a course of a time, you could have a new organism that is evolving from the existing ones. So this variation in turn would contribute towards evolution, and we call this variation as a tool for evolution.
We have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching Biophobia. Kindly do comment below if you have any doubts or clarifications regarding this session. Thank you once again.